I think it's happening on a level now with a lot more. There's a lot more alchemists who don't know they're alchemists out there, and I think that's part of what my job is to help help awaken the alchemists who are the butterflies.
Right.
It's a new consciousness that we're part of, that we're all stepping into. But in order to step into it, it's a new way of being. And it's the mind ego thing has created all that we have now. It's
Right.
the expansion, it's the patriarchy, it's this whole thing that we've developed. We had to go through this phase of evolution
Right.
to create what we have, but
Civilization.
we're at the end of that. We're stepping into something entirely new.
Maybe it is that huge. We're
It is.
things that are like really foundational.
Yeah.
Giant things.
But all that stuff will develop as humanity steps out of the mind ego way and is able to become the watcher of the whole experience and be a perfect light channel of your own particular recipe of life. You know, your own perfect recipe, so that because it's there to allow it's there to serve the greater evolution of the species.
Hi there. Colin Davis, ShadowTechAlchemy.com, and SolutioPodcast.com, MelissaMariMovie.com, MelissaMariMusic.com. And that was Melissa. That was a piece of the film that I made about Melissa. It's called Melissa Mari, Musical Alchemist of Stage and Psyche. MelissaMariMovie.com, yes. And that film will be out end of this year, beginning of next year. It's being shopping into film festivals still. But, you know, that was what Melissa was saying there. You know, it's about, we mythologized what, you know, the evolution of humanity, right? And the potential of human beings. We mythologized it a little bit, definitely. But at the same time, what we were doing and what I'm continuing to do is really, truly is at the cutting edge of human development. That's what we're doing with our lives, is that we're dedicating ourselves to inner work, to interdevelopmental work, and not just any kind of interdevelopmental work, not just any kind of spiritual practice, but inner alchemy, or what Jung called individuation, which puts you in direct touch with your shadow material. This is the most difficult part of inner development. So we're not just, you know, playing around the edges with this. We're going right in to the cave. We're going right in there. But what Melissa and I were doing was to develop maps and tools for ourselves and for anybody else, so that we can go into our own shadows, so that we could do that work and not get totally lost down there, and to be able to succeed in doing that. Because there is the potential for some people, when you go into your shadow material, there is the potential that you will get lost down a rabbit hole. You will become psychotic. You will fall apart. That does happen to some people. And so, you know, so that was our job, is to be explorers, to be experimenters, to be alchemists, and then to document what we were doing and that's what I continually did, and that's why I have all the footage that went into the film, is because I was documenting everything. And so so to document and to develop these tools and practices and study what other people have done and try those things out and see what works for us and share our own ideas and practices. And so that's what we've been doing. That's what I've been, we were both on the path for many, many years, but we had 12 years together where it was, just absolutely prolific. And this takes us to the subject of our talk today, which is relational alchemy, or emotional alchemy in relationship is what I think I called it. And so this, I got my notes for today, and what's gonna happen here is that I'll be, I'm working it out. I mean, I've talked about we both, Melissa and I, have been talking about the alchemical relationship and processing conflict and turning conflict into growth, pulling, working through your complexes, through your pain body, through your parts, however you want to put it, working through all of this through conflict in relationship. We talked about this for years. And so it's the same subject. It's one chunk of our work together. And so I'll be talking about this for the rest of my life and continuing to build on it. But now I'm ever since Melissa's passing, now I'm, working on new ways of sharing our work with the world. And so I'm doing these live workshops now. And I'm in Austin, Texas now. We were in the San Francisco Bay Area, but now I'm in Austin. And so I started presenting here. I had my first workshop this last Saturday. And it went extremely well, although it was small. It was fine for a start, But it is true that what we talk about it can be scary. And the workshop that I gave on Saturday was more of a broad overview of the Jungian shadow, but also with integral theory in there and some other newer concepts. And the terminology that I used and the way I made the poster and everything, it looked very intriguing and a lot of people saw it. I know that a lot of people were attracted to the poster because it was intriguing, but it was probably a little intimidating as well. And then the subject itself is intimidating because it's one thing to say, yeah, I've heard of the shadow. I know what the shadow is basically, or just have heard of it, or I've heard of shadow work, or I've heard of internal family systems. But then to walk through the door of a workshop and, commit to it and decide to go in there more deeply, that's another layer of commitment. And we are naturally afraid of our shadow material. It's why it's in the shadow, right? So we naturally have cognitive dissonance around it. So when someone starts to say, hey, look at this, put your face into this, the natural unconscious impulse is to not do that. So that is one of the big issues. And Melissa and I were professional musicians for our whole lives, and so it was like that's already a difficult path to take, but still it's a lot more popular. Any genre is going to be a lot more popular than shadow work. But we went into this domain because this is part of our soul path, and so I'm stuck with it. And so now my job is to simplify it, to demystify it, and to package it in a way that is attractive to people, or at least that is palatable for people. And so that's been one of my challenges, is to do that. So now with that workshop out of the way, now the next one is this one, the alchemical relationship. And so I'll probably rotate them, and there'll be some other ones, and I'll just keep, working on it, and we'll see kind of what formula ends up working best. And I may end up doing some online versions as well. But what we're going to talk about today is based on the notes that I've been working on for this next workshop, the alchemical relationship. So, let me give you a kind of a rundown of what the alchemical relationship is, how I see that. And I would say that you could say it's, the most basic way to explain it is it's a conscious relationship, right? We've all heard of that, having a conscious relationship, a self-aware relationship, a relationship where their communication is deep, and where people are honest, and they try not to hold things back, and they try to be clean, and where it's deep enough that you can talk about your difficulties and this kind of thing. That's just basic conscious relationship. But the alchemical relationship, I'd say, is another step up from that, because in this relationship, we're doing alchemy. We're not just being conscious. We're not just being aware. And we're not just, engaging with some kind of spiritual principles or something, but we're doing alchemy. And what alchemy requires is it requires conscious investigation of your shadow, right? And if you look at alchemy, if you look at the stages of alchemy, you'll see the first stage is the negrito, right? Then the albedo, the rubedo, or however you want to put it, whatever version of that. But they all start with the negrito or with calcination or putrefatio. I think putrefaction, right? And so they start with the blackening. They start with the yucky stuff, and it's not like you can, a lot of times you find yourself in the shadow. That's how it usually starts when you're just an individual and you start working on yourself deeply. It's because the shadow finds you, right? You slip and fall, and then you have to say, well, how am I contributing to my own problems? And so you start investigating yourself, and what you find is you find your dark side, you find your hidden material, right? And so, but in the alchemical relationship, we're not just, this is something where we're going and looking for shadow material that shows up in the relationship, and we're using the relationship as a container for analysis. So our partners are our analysts. And so we don't necessarily have to get into the relationship through the negrito. We don't start a relationship because we're in the dirt. We all the reasons why people start a relationship are just pure chemistry. And but once you're in this, if both people are aware that they're on a spiritual path, that they want to evolve themselves, that they have issues, they have complexes, they have garbage, right? And they realize that, wow, each of us has some analytical capacity and some interest in psychospiritual work. Well, we can be partners in this, and we could work on ourselves together. Instead of using a therapist, or maybe you still do have a therapist or some kind of outside mentor, but most of the work is happening in the container of the relationship. This is where you consciously decide to use the relationship to go into the darker material, to the wounds, to the complexes, to the shadow. And so it's a therapeutic relationship, right? So that's its own kind of relationship. And from what I can see, it's very rare. And in my experience with Melissa, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And I had plenty of different relationships in life, some of which were very powerful and charged with energy, but nothing compares to this, right? Because this is just the most substantive and deep and meaningful and cathartic and creative kind of relationship that I can even imagine. It's an evolutionary relationship. In the relationship, you're evolving, and you know you're evolving, and you're working through your stuff, and you know you're looking back year after year and going, wow, I'm better. I'm more advanced. I'm more mature. I'm more emotionally mature. I'm not as reactive as I used to be. My values are changing to be higher values. If it's a man, then he's saying my masculinity is more balanced and my femininity is more present. If it's a woman, she's saying my femininity is more balanced and my masculinity is more present, right? So I understand myself better. I understand the processes that are going on inside of my relationship. I understand inside of my own psyche, and inside a relationship, and inside my family relationships and my workplace relationships. I understand these dynamics more, is what you're saying year after year. You're saying I understand the reflectivity, the mirroring of the movie of life, and I understand how that's all working out. And you're taking the alchemical practice and you're putting it into the relationship, and you and your partner are both engaged in the process. Now, you might be reading your own material and might be having your own, you're obviously having your own experiences, but you're coming together as partners and you're sharing your experiences with each other and helping each other to work out your stuff and to evolve. So it's, there's how many millions of people have been or are in therapy, right? So there's many people that are in some kind of therapeutic relationship, some kind of relationship that's about inner development, or that they have some kind of spiritual practice, and there's a priest, or there's a monk, or there's somebody that's in their life, a yogi that's in their life, that's advanced, that's giving them feedback. How many millions and millions or billions of people have that kind of relationship, right? What's going on? But how about doing that with your intimate partner? Where's that at? How many people are doing that? Have you even heard of that? Maybe you've heard of that. Maybe, right? So it's very rare, actually. Most of the time, you definitely have a lot of people who have similar spiritual practices. They're in the same church, they're in the same ashram, they're in the same temple, whatever it is. But that's not alchemy. That's not what that is. A spiritual practice, but it's not alchemy. Alchemy is a spiritual path of transformation or transmutation through descent. It's not an ascent path. It's a descent path. You get to the high stuff through the low stuff. You go into the low stuff to pull the gold out that raises you back up and puts you in a new place, that turns you on the spiral. So this is a descent path. That's what alchemy is. Most spiritual paths are not that. And so this is pretty rare. It shouldn't be, but it is still. And turns out Melissa and I, that's the path we were on, and that's what we were doing, and that's what we just naturally started to do. That's what came through us. And then as it was coming through us, we're looking around in the world and going, who else is doing this? What is this? And we discovered, well, this is alchemy. Oh, wow. And it took years and years to actually kind of build up the context and to understand what we were doing. So that's the alchemical relationship. Now, I got my notes here. So the first thing I want to say about doing this work and this alchemical work, this healing work in the context of a relationship is that some of the principles that I'm going to go through now are kind of high level, and it's you before we get here, we have to have some kind of handle on our boundaries, on our relational boundaries, right? Because if we're still really struggling with boundaries, and especially if the boundary issues that we have lead to abuse, and we have a history of either abusing other people verbally or physically, or being abused verbally or physically, emotionally, then at least one of the principles that I'm going to bring up in a second is going to be a little bit out of reach. Now, it's definitely possible to be working in the way that I'm going to describe while still working on your boundaries. Melissa and I were doing that. We still were working on our boundaries, but both of us had acquired some level of understanding of when another person was going too far into our field, right? When another person was getting too needy, or they were getting too aggressive, and there was too much codependency, or there was too much aggression, or any kind of abuse, or any kind of crossing over boundaries that was too extreme. And I would say that a lot of people who are on the spiritual path have been hurt. They've been wounded, and it starts in the family. And there was, there were attachment issues, and there were issues in the family where they're still acting out some of these destructive relationship patterns. And especially when you're in your 20s. When you're 20s, you're experimenting with different relationships, or at least in the modern world you are, maybe not in the past, but in the modern world you're experimenting with different relationships, and you're finding, what works and what doesn't work. And some of your boyfriends or girlfriends are more or less abusive or codependent, pathological in one way or another. And if you are really at the place of having to tell people no, so to protect yourself, then I don't think what I'm talking about is going to be as applicable. That's the level that you're at, and you need to really get through that level of working through boundaries. Although if there's still, like I said, if there's still some boundary issues left over, but it's not totally pathological, and it's, you're not like really suffering through that, then yes, you can take on what I'm saying, and then you and your partner can work through your boundary issues. But I guess I would also say that if you're still at this earlier level, if your partner is abusive, then they're probably not going to be doing alchemy with you anyway. Right. So I guess that kind of probably settles it, tell you the truth. But I do have to put that out there as a caveat. And so, and then that'll become obvious in a minute. Now, the other caveat is that when you're working with your partner, what a lot of this is not just going to be study and talking about each other's shadows and what's down there and childhood trauma and that kind of stuff. That's a big part of it. But it's going to be working through complexes, through activated complexes, autonomous complexes. It's going to be working through conflicts. This is really where the juice is. Not the whole juice, but this is where some of it is. And this is the most difficult part because for some people, it's going to be hard to talk about their childhood issues with their partner. So there's difficulty there. And certainly processing it emotionally, like we're going to talk about, there's difficulty there. But there's a lot of difficulty when you have a pain body, so to speak, or where you have autonomous parts using the IFS language, or autonomous complexes using Jungian language, however you want to put it. And these complexes are intertwined with each other in the relationship, and you're triggering each other, and these things are getting up and running, and then you're having unconscious autonomous activity going on, and you're having a fight, you're having a conflict of some kind. And it could be an outright kind of typical fight, or it could be something where somebody says or does something that makes the other person recede back, and then they fall into a feeling of victimhood, and then they just tuck in and they recede back. It's not a fight, but it's still a breakdown of the relational field. And there's different variations for how people's complexes, what Melissa and I would call your pain body profile. Different people have different pain body profiles or parts profiles. But regardless of how the conflict looks, whether it's more passive and pulling away, or whether it's active and people attacking each other, one person attacking the other person and then taking the abuse for a while, and then the other person attacking back, and then they abuse the abuser. This is, pretty common. We called it the victim-victor script, right? So when that's running, this is difficult to work through that and wake up during it or after it, and then process the emotions and analyze it and take it apart. That's what we're going to be talking about today, because that's really the most difficult part of being in this kind of a relationship. Now, everybody's doing this, whether they're alchemists or not. But the difference is most people are doing it completely unconsciously with no idea how to work it through, how to process the emotional material that's behind it, how to turn the conflict into evolution and growth rather than destruction of the relationship. They don't know how to do that. So that's not what they're doing. And so what a lot of times they do is they just learn to tiptoe around their issues, tiptoe around each other's complexes. So, and that's no good, because then you can't get to anything. You can't do anything. How can you be an alchemist with you're just tiptoeing around the other person's complexes? You can't. So that's not what they're doing. But that's not what we're doing. So, but what I was going to say is that complexes and shadow don't want to be transmuted. Reading from my notes here. They want to run the old machinery of projection and displacement. This is a new and challenging evolutionary step. It turns conflicts into intimacy, trust, and healing rather than relational destruction. So, yeah, Shadow material, like I was saying earlier, shadow material doesn't want to be seen. Complexes don't want to be pulled up and pulled apart and drained. They don't want that. They want to keep on doing what they are doing. And this comes from the fact that, like I said there, this is the old machinery. So the human being has only barely just now got to the point to where we can actually transmute shadow consciously. That was not available to human beings up until about now. You know, I mean, there was always people who were advanced, you know, way more advanced than everybody else. But we've only now really reached a place to where a lot of people could do this. Even though most people don't do this, and there's still all that natural pushback, a lot more people can do this now. But it's still very much at the cutting edge. When Jung started bringing this kind of awareness into public consciousness in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 50s mainly, because he was gone by 61, and then all his Jungians, you know, continued it on. But when over those decades in the middle of the 20th century, that was really the beginning of when more people could do this kind of work. And it's very close behind us now. I wish that things had progressed faster and that we could progress faster. There would be more people doing this work if that had, but you know, it's just in its own timeline. It does what it's going to do on its own timeline, and we can't control that. That's human evolution. That's how it works. But we who are doing it, we know what we're doing, and we know that what we're doing is very evolutionary, and that there's for very good reason why we're doing this. We're healing ourselves, and people who do this and have children, they end up being inspirational to their children, and then they can pick it up, and we can teach to other people, and so we're evolving the whole species. Those of us who are doing this, even if it's slowly, but that's what we're engaged in. But the machinery of the psyche has been, first of all, like I've talked about many times. There's kind of two categories of shadow material. There's the normal or ego-based shadow material, what I've been calling structural shadow, which is just a consequence of having a conscious ego that is separate from the unconscious and that stores all kinds of social values that limits our ability to act out primally. Your conscious mind, your persona, they call it in Jungian psychology, your superego, it's called in Freudian psychology, is limiting you from just acting out the way you want to act out, because that's antisocial, that's primal, that's animalistic, and it's destructive to yourself and to society. And so what we do with our lower material, our primal material, our wounded material, is we push it down. We repress it. And then it has to go somewhere. And so then it leaks out into all kinds of shady behavior, and we project it onto scapegoats, onto enemies. That's the bad one out there, right? And so then we can kind of sit in our own righteousness, and we can be like, yeah, you know, I might have problems, but nothing like them. The focus is on them. They're the ones that need to clean up. I'll be okay. Don't worry about me. So we get to go free while we hang evil on other people. And not just evil in general, we hang our own personal darkness on other people. We actually can't see our own stuff. And so then we see it in them. They actually hold our specific shadow material for us. So we've been doing that, and then we have every excuse to go act out and to try to stop them and to go to war and whatever we're going to do to stop the evil out there. And that is how human beings have operated for millennia. And that's the machinery of the psyche in terms of dealing with the shadow. And that doesn't want to change. There's a lot of inertia and a lot of genetics and culture. The whole cultures are based on this. What they call the military-industrial complex, that's a whole institutional system that's there to displace our shadow material onto other people, right? And all these ideologies and, that frame one group as the good group and the other group as the bad, and all of this is all machinery, cultural, institutional machinery to offload our shadows. So when someone turns around and says, we're not doing that anymore. No. We know how this works. We see how projection works, and we're going to start taking responsibility for our shadow material, then everything pushes back on that. So that's the structural shadow, and it's providing pushback. Then there's the shadow of dysregulated complexes, the IFS stuff, the exiled parts, the pain body, right? And that's created through personal trauma, specific trauma it's called, or developmental trauma. It's passed along to you. We now know epigenetics is real. And the markers of trauma are getting passed to you. And so then that kind of shadow is where you have split up parts in you. And that's what we're kind of be going into more today, where you've got aspects of you that are split off, and they're kind of feral. They're doing their own thing. They're orphaned. And because they're not integrated into the greater psyche, they can easily be triggered, and then they have their own little temper tantrum, or they have their own little primal needs that are going off, and they're not tucked into the greater family of the psyche. And so they're over there kind of waiting to get triggered. And then we find other people. When you meet another person, not just in an intimate relationship, but in a work relationship, friends, wherever, even on the street, when you meet another person and there's chemistry there, there's chemistry through your whole ecosystem. It's not just your ego and your anima, animus projections and all that stuff. It's your shadow stuff. It's your pain body. It's your complexes. They're connecting too. So when you have conflicts with people, there's under the table operations, undercover operations, that you got your shadow parts that are dancing too. In fact, they're the ones that are compelling you when you're having a negative kind of conflict. They're having their way. So that's the kind of shadow material that we're working a lot with in relationships. Because the other type of shadow is usually projected out of the relationship. The couple will agree, these are the bad guys. Not, we're the good ones, they're the bad ones. And so a couple will join together and project their ego-based shadow onto other people and other groups. But then they'll fight based on the complex shadow, the dysregulated parts of the psyche. So, and they don't want to be seen, and they want to, even though they're kind of hurting down there and they're not happy and they're not, this is what they know. This is what they know, like feral animals. This is what they know. And you try to approach them and everything, they're going to be like, get away from me. Now, a lot of times with feral animals, if they were previously domesticated, then you can slowly bring them into the family and start treating them nicely, and they'll start to trust you, and you can bring a feral animal into the house and you can take care of it, and it'll work out and become part of the family. It'll probably always be traumatized though. and people know this, when you bring in an animal that was feral, or it comes from a family line that was feral, and you bring it into your house, you're going to have problems with that animal. And it's the same thing about people who are traumatized, is that, yes, you can bring those parts back in. Yes, you absolutely can. You don't have to be getting triggered and run by these very primitive complexes. But that material is going to be there, and to some degree, it's going to get a lot better, though. It's going to get a lot better. Your parts are going to get a lot more comfortable and trusting. If you do the work and you're real clean about the work, then that's going to get nice, and it's going to get much more tame. Even if you might have sensitivities in those areas, you're going to get a lot of it worked out. So, but you have to commit to that, and that happens over a period of years. And so that's what I was going to say there. That's the caveat. That's kind of an explanation of different kinds of shadow material and where the complexes come in, but also the caveat that these systems don't want to be unearthed. And so this takes real effort and will and focus. Okay, so now, and hi to the folks in the chat. And when is my next class? It's not at Casa de Luz. It's, I don't know, maybe in a month or 6 weeks. It'll be on the shadowtechalchemy.com website on the workshops page. So keep an eye on that. So now here we are. Relational complexes, what they are and how they work. I think I just kind of described that, actually, right? You come into the relationship, you have a pain body, you got split up parts, you got exiled parts. These are all just terms that we use. You can't see the psyche, right? And it's quite variable from person to person. And there's no x-ray that you can just put on the human psyche and go, oh, there's our parts, Maybe someday, but not now. And so we're using maps and metaphors and images to try to explain the invisible domain of the psyche. And a lot of times you have to use multiple maps. So that's what I do. I just use as many maps as I feel comfortable with. But so yes, you have a relationship. I have my relationship with Melissa, and then my parts, my pain body has a relationship with her pain body, right? So there's not 2 people in the room, there's 4 people in the room, or it's many more than 4 actually. But, and what I have here is I'm going to read to you from this paper that I put out, was it maybe a month or 6 weeks ago or something, called the Shadow Complex. And you all could download that. It's on the Shadow Tech Alchemy website. Look on the papers page. It's called the Shadow Complex, and it'll give you a whole education on complexes, what they are, how they work, everything I've just been talking about in detail. And there will be an example in there of a couple that I called Chris and Layla. So I think I'm going to read to you this example, and everybody will recognize this example. And the example that I'm going to use is of a very mild kind of relational complex. But everybody can just see the much more violent and much more aggressive and pathological versions of these. And many of us have had those in our lives. So let me pull this up, and then I'll read this to you. Again, this is the Shadow Complex paper on the papers page at shadowtechalchemy.com. Okay, complexes have us. Now let's move into the ways complexes can behave pathologically and distort conscious experience. When we talk about being triggered in common parlance, we're often talking about the activation or constellation of a complex, although triggering also occurs when ego-based shadow is accessed. When someone says, "I don't know what came over me," they're speaking of an activated complex. When we look at the news today and see so many examples of human beings suddenly acting out criminally, as if possessed by demons, we're talking about the activation of seriously pathological, trauma-based autonomous complexes. Once a complex is activated, it pulls experience towards itself. A core emotion floods our consciousness. Our perception becomes selectively filtered. Our egos get flooded with confirming memories, and our emotional tone shifts into a preset direction. We get tunnel vision and we become highly compulsive. Something has come over us. A complex is also never purely psychological. Every activation is simultaneously a cognitive event, an emotional event, a somatic event, a behavioral impulse, and a relational expectation. John Sarno's work on psychosomatic pain arrived at the same place from a medical direction. The psyche can route unconscious emotional content into the body when becoming conscious of it is too threatening to the ego. The body becomes the carrier of what the mind cannot bear to fathom. Take this into consideration when contemplating the sharp increase in physical syndromes and symptoms the population is now experiencing. I just realized I'm reading you the part before the relational complex. That's okay, we're getting into it. It's also worth noting that a complex becomes dangerous not only by being dysregulated, but also by being denied. A complex that is known, even a painful one, is already moving towards health. It's the complex that we insist we haven't got that gathers strength in the dark and returns with considerably more force than it would have if it were acknowledged. Complexes can operate with semi-autonomy. They have characteristic triggers, they generate predictable response sequences, can override conscious intention, and they cycle in and out of activation independently of conscious will. This is what Jung meant when he said that we don't just have complexes, complexes have us. Okay, now the relational complex example. The descriptions so far have been mostly structural. Complexes as organs of the unconscious, feeling-toned clusters gathered around an archetypal core, or that's what they are. They're organs of the unconscious, and they are feeling-tone clusters gathered around an archetypal core. But experienced from the inside, a complex doesn't show up this way. It often comes wearing the face of another person. The thought that shows up in our heads during a relational conflict is usually not the realization that an autonomous complex has been triggered, but it's the perception that something is wrong with the other person that finally needs to be dealt with. Now let's look at an example of complex patterning that plays out constantly in close relationships. In this case, the complex is only mildly disruptive to life, but extremely common. I'll call the two people in this example Chris and Layla. Chris and Layla have been getting to know each other for about 2 months. They've been hanging out together, calling, texting, and having deep conversations. The slow movement of two people becoming important to each other. Then one afternoon, seemingly out of the blue, Chris finds himself complaining about Layla's texting. He's noticed how long she sometimes takes to reply, and he suspects that she may not be reading all of his messages. He's noticed this before, but didn't think it was a big deal. Suddenly, it now feels urgent, weighty, and his feelings about it are entirely out of proportion to the surface concern. He asks her if his messages are getting through, and wonders if her ringer was turned on. Later, when trying to describe this moment, he says, "I don't know where this impulse came from exactly. It had just been building in me, and suddenly I felt it had to be said." Layla hears the complaint and feels herself tighten. Chris's tone now sounds unfamiliar. Something has shifted. She answers carefully but pulls back, less available, more measured, her voice becoming more masculine. Chris, I don't feel like I've been avoiding you at all. I'm always just casual with my texting. I usually keep my ringer off for reasons of sanity, but now I feel like you're pushing me, trying to control me. Chris is self-aware enough not to push it too far, but the conversation ends with Layla distancing herself from him, and the two temporarily retreat. From Chris's side, her withdrawal looks like proof of the very problem he was trying to pin down. Something in her is blocking their connection. From Layla's side, his complaint looks like the first sign of a dynamic she's lived through before, a partner becoming demanding, moving towards control. In earlier relationships of hers, things like this had exploded tragically. She learned long before she met Chris that safety requires a certain distance. The texting, of course, isn't the real issue. A relational complex has been constellated in the field between them, and the texting behavior is the innocent-looking vehicle it chose to ride in on. Intimacy is what actually set off the complex. Relational complexes don't fire randomly. They activate when a relationship pattern starts to resemble the shape of an original wound, often related to closeness, dependency, or the need to be truly seen. The deeper the intimacy becomes, the more the present moment begins to echo the conditions that first caused the wound, and the more the old unhealed material gets stirred up and pulled to the surface. A complex built around a relational wound runs on a damaged script, and when external conditions call on it, it runs that script again. Someone begins reaching too hard for the other, or pulling away too fast, and confusing the past with the present. What their intimacy revealed was already there. Closeness didn't create it, it just brought it into view. The surface grievance is almost always a cover story. The complex picks a stand-in issue, such as texting, a tone of voice, or a missed call, because the emotional wound beneath it is far older and carries far more psychological charge than the present circumstance. But the cover story isn't random. It usually rhymes with the underlying wound. Complaints about reciprocity tend to point to abandonment material. Complaints about autonomy tend to point back to parental emotional engulfment and control. For Chris, slow text replies confirm an old fear that when he reaches for someone, they won't fully reach back. For Layla, the complaint itself confirms an older fear that closeness turns into pressure, then control, then something she has to escape. Both are reacting with the full conviction to a wound the other didn't cause. Each person casts the other into an ancient role. The person in front of you briefly disappears, and an archetypal figure takes their place. The absent mother, the withholding or punitive father, the suffocating caregiver, the critic. Afterwards, when they come back to themselves, people often say some version of, "I wasn't even seeing you." That isn't a figure of speech. Until the complex releases its hold, the real person isn't actually in the room. The two partners' reactions to each other are actually one movement. The complex lives equally between them. With most relational complexes of this type, one partner reaches and the other partner keeps their distance. One attacks, the other protects. These look like opposite behaviors, but they are two sides of a single process. Two psyches are working through an intimate connection that has become deep enough to stir up old material. Neither partner is the primary problem. Both partners are involved completely. Both partners have a complex, or a pain body in Eckhart Tolle's words. Both partners have exiled and protective parts in IFS terms, and they will always create relationships with these dynamics until they dig up their complexes. They either consciously work through these dynamics or continue to play out the complex scripting chronically throughout life. And when you see this same dynamic playing out in entire populations who are involved in tribal or nation-state level conflicts, you now can see where this all comes from. This is playing out en masse through the collective human psyche. The way through is not to shut the triggered activation down. And it's not to act out the complex's scripting as if its version of reality is objectively true. It's to keep the container of relationship intact. Notice that something much older has walked into the room and ask, what part of me and what part of you is getting fed by this conflict? Working through our complexes is the price we must pay for deep, intimate relationship. As we deepen intimacy, the wounds we carry finally get close enough to the surface to be seen. And if both people can stay in the room and can apply some psychological lenses and tools, these wounds can finally be worked with. When you're in the alchemical vessel of deep relationship and it starts to get hot, if you break the container, the alchemy stops. But to succeed in the work, you need awareness of what's going on, tools of the trade, great sensitivity, and serious courage to use the activation of a complex to go into the old wounds so they can get aired out and their emotional content integrated. And then I say, see my books, Transforming Darkness or Shadow Tech, both of which have descriptions of what we call emotional processing that you can use to integrate emotional material after the activation of a relational complex. And as mentioned earlier, look into the internal family systems model. Okay, so I realized while reading that through, because I haven't read that through in a month or something, that some of the language in there is a little bit kind of sharp and obtuse or something. So I'm going to have to go back through there and kind of clean that up so that it reads a little easier. But that's a good description of how complexes work, how relational complexes work, how the pain body works, whatever terms you want to use. And that's what we're working with. So, okay. So then now back to my notes here, the Chris and Layla example. Okay, I gave you that. So now let me take you through this stack of skills I've got here. And we have it down as notice it, process it, name it, and record it. And then later, as you become more advanced, notice it, name it, process it, record it. Let me explain that. So the first skill in turning your fights or your conflicts into alchemical gold, into intimacy, and into healing is to become aware while your complexes are triggered. When you're triggered by something in a relationship, this is the same thing when you're just triggered from the most basic shadow stuff, out in the world, you're online or something and you're getting triggered. You're triggered by your neighbor, whatever, you're triggered by something that happens. But when you're in the relationship we're talking about here, when you're triggered in relationship and you find that your emotions start coming up, you start getting taken over, then what you want to develop first is just the witness consciousness, the watcher or witness consciousness that says, wow, what's going on right here? I'm getting taken over. Wow, I'm not myself right now. Whoa, what is this? Or maybe right before that, you notice that you're starting to get you're becoming obsessive compulsive about something your partner is doing, right? And you're like looking at it and you're like really focusing on it. and you're like, what is this? And you're like, really start picking at the other person, right? So you start, or your mood starts shifting, and you start getting more, some people get kind of anxious, or they get kind of depressed, they kind of pull back, or they get aggressive. Different complexes have different archetypal cores, it's called. And so you start to notice when a complex is getting triggered. And then you can start to see the other person's reactivity and how they're getting involved. And it's like, oh, okay, this is going on. Something's in the field. And you can start to really feel how something's in the field, something's moving, something negative is happening. I feel something shifting, something. And at first, what you're going to think, this is important, at first, what you're going to think is something's going on with the other person. Something's going on with him, with her. Something's going on. They're changing, they're shifting. Whoa, what is coming over them? That's what you're going to think at first. Because what's in your complex is in the shadow. And so it projects. And you are seeing, because it's a relational complex, you are seeing some of their stuff, and they're seeing some of your stuff. You're just not seeing your own. It takes two to tango. So they both are getting activated, but you can only see them. But once you get more sensitive to this, you'll start to notice yourself and your own stuff, your own OCD, and your own aggression or your own emotional material one way or the other. And so that's the first step, is just getting to notice it. And I can remember actually one argument that I had with a roommate, with Diane was her name. And this was about a year before Melissa and I started our relationship. 2 years before probably. And, my relationship with Diane was just a roommate situation, but we had a relational complex. And it was a mother-son complex, is what it was. And so I was kind of playing out my negative mother complex with her, and so. But I remember on this one occasion getting into this fight with her, and I remember. I had already developed a certain level of awareness, and I could already kind of watch myself involved in conflicts. And, I already had some level of awareness, but never enough to stop it or anything like that. But in this case, I remember that my consciousness was truly above my head. Was like right here above my head while I'm yelling at her and arguing, and she's yelling at me and all of this, and we're like slamming doors and stuff. And it's like my consciousness is like right here. It's like above. And I was like, wow, this is wild. And I was just watching. But I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't stop myself from slamming the door. I don't know what that was. Is just some kind of display of infantile display. And but I remember after that, first of all, I remember my consciousness being above my head, and I remember, wow, that was really something new there. And then I also noticed how after the fight, Diane was nice to me, and that's how my mother is too. And I remember analyzing it and going, what is going on here? Why would she be nice to me after a fight? Because, this is how she was able to get, her complex had a pattern where she needed to dump shadow material. And then once that shadow material was dumped, then intimacy and love and care could come in. But it required that first dumping process. It's common with these relational complexes. So, that's when I really first remember really like making a jump on this. And then when Melissa and I got together, because we were both interested in this, now I couldn't have this kind of conversation with Diane because even if I had some psychological knowledge, which I did have some at the time, she wouldn't have engaged in a conversation with me about it. I mean, she might have, but she wouldn't have really cared that much for it. Whereas with Melissa, she was like, yeah, let's figure this out. So as we got into our conflicts, we were able to really analyze them and trace them down and all of that. But we both, and Melissa actually had better awareness and control while she was triggered and activated than I did for many years. It took me years to kind of catch up to her. But so the first thing in our list of skills here is notice it. Notice before, during, and definitely after what is going on, and that there's a conflict, there's a complex that's constellated. That's the first thing, the noticing part. Then there's process it. So once you're more advanced with it, you can actually go to the naming it function, and you can name it while you're in it. While you're in the conflict, you can be like, oh, check it out. We're doing it again. Here it is. This is such and such part that's come up. Wow. And you can talk about it in the middle of the conflict, and you can pull away from the whole thing, right? That's what you can do when you get more advanced. But before that, that takes quite a while. Before that, you notice it. It has its activation. You have your conflict with the other person. That part is out of your control. The more you can watch it, though, and stay aware, that will mitigate the amount of destruction in the conflict. The more you can stay aware while the conflict is running, that will tame it. That will tame the fire. But it will probably still find its whole way out. But it'll be enough to make it so that you won't really go crazy with it. Okay, now you've noticed it. Now you've got to process the emotions that the complex, that are at the core of the complex, right? You've got to process those emotions now. Now they're up. They've been stirred up. The complex has been activated. You dumped shadow material onto each other. And now that whole system is all open and running. And now you got to go sit down and you got to go process that energy through your physiology. Because this is why you have the complex in the first place, is because that segment of the psyche is split off, right? It's ostracized, it's orphaned. And so it never really gets to process its emotions through your normal psychophysiological channels. That's why this is all happening. It's autonomous. It's out here. So normally when your complexes are integrated, you get emotions, you get triggered by something or whatever, and the system can process it and you can behave in a way that's measured and appropriate. But when the complex is split or autonomous, it can't do that measured and appropriate kind of action, and so it's out of control. So you've got to bring that thing back in. You got to bring that orphaned part back in, and so you've got to start draining that and processing the emotions that are behind that part. And the best time to do that is after an activation, after a conflict, when all this material is up. So this is where we take you into our emotional processing technique that's in both of our books. And this is where it comes from John Ruskin's emotional clearing technique that he does in meditation. And we just said, no, you just do it after you're triggered in a fight, right? So that's when we're doing it. And you can do it anytime you want to access deeply repressed emotional material and pull it up. But the best time is when it's triggered in a conflict. So what you do is either separate from your partner and go into the other room. This is not going for a walk. This is not going for a run. This is not taking a hit of some weed or drinking some wine or a beer or something. This is not any of those things. This is not distracting in any way. This is not turning on TV or scrolling on Facebook. This is going and sitting down without any of those distractions. And it's saying, okay, this emotional material is up, and I'm now going to process this material. I'm going to drain the wound. I'm going to drain this thing, and I'm going to pull this emotional material up and channel it the way it's supposed to be channeled. So if anger's on top, then you're just going to let the anger be. And all the scripts are going to be running in your head. Oh, she did this, she did that, he did this, did that, blah, blah, blah. And you just go, okay, that's there, that's running, you leave that alone. And you just concentrate on your body, and you concentrate on your emotional material. And you let that anger fill your body, fill your face. You don't hit anything. Now, below the anger, or you may have already processed the anger in the fight, but below the anger, and this might be on top, is going to be some kind of grief, some kind of sadness, or maybe fear or guilt. Some kind of more feminine emotion is going to be there. The anger is a masculine emotion. And these other emotions like guilt, grief, shame, fear, these are more feminine. I don't know what fear is. Fear is kind of both, but those others are more feminine. They're more inward moving, more passive. They move more slowly. So what you're going to do is, let's say you're getting into some kind of grief that's below that anger, and you're just sitting there with it, and it's right there, and you're just going to let it come up, and you're going to cry through it. And in fact, the crying is like the primary kind of modality of doing this. The anger or the fear is kind of like they're on top, but then there's always going to be a feminine thing, and it's always going to lead down to crying. And then you're going to want to cry through this material. And if you're not very good at crying, the more you'll do this, you'll get good at crying. And then that will be the outlet for this material. And you'll be draining the emotions that this complex or these parts have been sequestering or using or feeding on, or however you want to put it. And so we're getting good at crying. And you can do it alone. Do it in your room. Do it in your car. Kick back under a tree, put your seat back, privately somewhere. Do it wherever you need to do it. And then when you become more comfortable, you do it with your partner. They're on the couch, you're on the couch, sitting each few feet away from each other, and you both go through the emotional clearing process, the emotional processing. This is the core of the whole thing. You don't do this, nothing's going to change. It's not enough to just analyze your complex. It's not enough to just say, oh, we got a pain body. Oh, we have parts, they're running. Yes, you can do IFS parts work, but ultimately, when you get in touch with these parts, you're going to end up crying because some of them need to cry. No matter what, you're going to be crying. And this is where it really stops a lot of people, men and women, I've noticed. And it's just something that you just get used to it, and it just becomes, easier. It's not a big deal. But you learn how to cry, and then you just cry it out, and you cry for as long as you need to. And you just sit there, put everything else to the side, and you just cry through it. And it might be 5-10 minutes. Sometimes it might be an hour. Who knows? It'll vary depending on what it is and where you are in the process. In my experience, and with Melissa, is that we went through a phase where we were doing a lot of this crying, where the fighting was more often, and there was more processing and more crying. And then it cleaned out. A lot of this cleaned out. We didn't have to do it as much after that. And we still had conflicts, but they were a lot smaller. 5, 6, 7 years later, it was way, 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 way smaller. A lot less of this, a lot less processing was needed. So this stuff integrates, these wounds start to drain, and you don't need it as much. But then when you do need it, when stuff happens in life, you have this skill set now, so you can do this. So that's the emotional processing method, and you can find the original in John Ruskin's book, Emotional Clearing, or you can find that version in either of my books. Then, so we've got name it, or what did I, no, I got no, okay, notice it. Notice it is first. Notice the complex is running. That's the first thing. Even if you can't, don't get mad at yourself if you can't stop yourself from getting into a fight. Don't get mad at yourself if all you can do is just notice it, or not, or even if you can't even notice it until after the fact. It's a process. It's a learning process. And so you notice it, then you process it. Notice it while it's going on, while the fight's going on. Process it after the fight's over. Then you name it. This requires some psychological knowledge on your part, and where you're going to be looking into this stuff a little bit. You're going to be looking at some books on IFS so that you can name your parts. You should do that. It's very easy now to study all this stuff. You just find videos online or talk to an AI chat agent and whatever. Get educated on internal family systems and what your parts are and how to name them and stuff. But we didn't even start with IFS. Before we even knew about IFS, we were naming. And so Melissa, had mad girl and sad girl, and we have all these different girl parts. And I had with me there was less parts. The main one was monkey boy, right? And so we're just like, monkey this, monkey that, mad girl's up, blah blah blah. We're just talking about our parts. And when you start naming your parts and you have a conversation with your partner about what parts got active, you don't talk about, I don't say, Melissa, you did this. Melissa, you did that. I say, oh, I see what happened. Mad girl got activated. Mad girl this, mad girl that. And so you don't actually insult the other person. You are just talking about their parts. Talk to their parts, talk about their parts, don't talk about them. Right? So that separates it, and it teaches you, it trains you into having conversations about your parts. So whether you're using IFS or whether you're just using your own intuition to train or to name your parts, then you do that and you write it down and you figure out what your different parts are. And this is something that we can talk more about. And if you guys have comments on this, we'll talk more about it. And because there's a whole lot to say about how to name your parts and what kind of names and stuff like that. So you notice it while it's going on. You notice the fight's going on or about to start. You have the fight or the conflict. Then you process it emotionally. Then you talk to each other and you name the parts and say, this is what got active and this is that. And you start to trace it down. Why did this happen? And you start to notice, where do your parts come from? And you are, because you're in an alchemical relationship, you're working on this. You're like, oh yeah, that part, that's from my childhood. That's from this. That's from when I got hurt this way or that way. This leads back down to this emotion or this anxiety. And you're noticing these things and you're digging this stuff up because this is the work. So you're naming it and you're tracing it down and all that. And then you're recording your conversation with your partner. I'm telling you how Melissa and I did this. And so you take your phone. Everybody's got a voice recorder app or something on their phone. And after you've had the fight, if you try to record while you're having a fight, well, first of all, both people have to agree to that. And that may be too much. The better thing to do is to record after the fight. Okay, whoa, what just happened? And you're processing, you're sitting on the couch, you're processing, you're doing the emotional processing, or you split off into other rooms and you're processing. And then you come back and you start talking to the other person and you pull the phone out and you say, let's record this. Let's have a conversation about what happened. Let's pull it apart. You put the phone on the table and you start recording. And you give it a name and give it a date and save it. Now, depending on the phone and the apps that you use or whatever, you can often transcribe that. Like on Apple with the newer operating systems, you can record into voice memos and then you can hit the little 3 dots and you can hit transcribe and it will give you a transcription in your notes, right? So that's in there and you save this stuff and you put it in a folder and you save the transcripts or the audio of your processing or of your conversations, your analysis of what happened in whatever language you know how to use. Wherever you're at with your analysis capacities, it doesn't matter, that's what you record. Then what you're going to be able to do, because of where AI is and stuff, is after a while, a year from now, a couple years from now or whatever, you can grab those transcripts and you can you can put those into an AI program and say, let's look at this, read this. Let's see how we've been doing with our progress. And let's put together a little, paraphrased version of what was going on with us. And you've documented the process, because an alchemist is documenting their work like a scientist is. And you don't have to document literally everything, but the stuff that's important, you should document. Or you can put it down in your journal or whatever. I like the recording way is because it happens right after the conflict and it's exactly, first of all, when you record, you're never going to remember exactly what happened in the fight. And if you could actually record the fight, then it would be good. But again, I think that's problematic. And we could talk about why that's problematic, but that is problematic. But right after, your memory is going to be as clean as possible. It's going to be relatively clean and relatively accurate. And so, because you have both people talking, and they can have their perspective on tape. So anyway, you have entered into the community of psychospiritual alchemists, the cutting edge of human development, because you're using these techniques, you're working it through, you're analyzing, you're emotionally processing, you're cleaning up your wounds, your complexes, and you're documenting the process for sharing it with others or teaching it to other people at some point. So that's it. That's what we're doing. Now, that's the whole thing. That's my whole thing for today. And there's a lot of stuff that's baked into everything that I was saying that I didn't elaborate on specifically because, for example, when you're analyzing your conflict and you're talking about your parts, there's depth and experience that goes into, tracing it down, and it's based on your prior conversations you've had with your partner about what your background is and what's hurt you in the past and all that. So how you trace things down, how you analyze, how you name, what modalities you use, what maps you use, it's kind of all up to you. I mean, I always tell you, I use the Jungian system, we use the IFS system, I use Tolley's understanding of the pain body, I overlay all this stuff, I use John Ruskin's emotional clearing process. This is kind of like our kind of custom version of things. But anything that looks and sounds and acts like that is the same stuff. It's the same. And this is only one part, like I was saying before, when I introduced the alchemical relationship, working with your complexes, your conflicts, is just one part of having an alchemical relationship. It's the most difficult part. This is why it's the most important part, because if you can do this with the other person, man, you've got it going on. You've got something badass right there. You've got something really cutting edge. So, and you're going to heal yourself that way. Yeah, you are. So that's the bomb, as they say. Now, it's all kind of other stuff, is because when you can do that with people and you can get to know that other person, you can depend on that other person, you can have that kind of level of intimacy and depth with another person, what else can you do with them? That person is your best friend. That person is your partner. And that person is, you can do a lot of, get very creative with that person. Very, very creative. Now, there's also alternate ways of doing this in relationship. You can do this with a close friend. You can do it with a platonic male-female relationship. The intimate one is the one where you're going to get more access to your stuff, because the intimate ones pull up all that. But you can have a platonic relationship that's very, very close, and it will get you access to all this stuff. So technically, you could do it with family members. Not most families are not going to be able to do that, but technically, you could do it with somebody in your family. You could do it with a brother or sister. With a parent, maybe. I mean, it's possible. It's always possible, but less likely with somebody else in the family. And so you can use anybody to do this with, but it's just two people who are committed to development and to healing, and however they are related is okay. What else can I say on this? Yeah, I think that's kind of a lot of it for tonight, you guys. So I want to say hi again to the folks in the chat, Dana and Theo, and what is your, I just cannot read the size of the text on the chat box in OBS. Oh, Vondasa? Yeah, you were the one that asked me when my next class was, right? Yeah, I'm gonna talk to the manager over there at CASA and see about when and how to do that. I want to basically do classes over there regularly, and just kind of have it kind of ongoing and kind of just rotate through different classes that are slight, it all kind of runs into the same material, but it's all shadow tech alchemy. It's all shadow work in one way or another, or just Jungian individuation is what it is. It's me and Melissa's version of Jungian individuation that I'm continuing on now. So, does anybody have any comments? Does anybody have anything to put in the comments? Because if it's gonna be a little quiet, then I'll just, I'll take off a little bit earlier, because on these Tuesday nights, I postpone eating dinner and all of that, and I've been staying up late, been getting in this. This is what artists do. Musicians and artists tend to kind of fall into the A lot of them, not all, but a lot of them tend to fall into the late night thing, and I can't really do that anymore. So if anybody came in here just now, we just went through the whole sort of stack of ideas that comes from me and Melissa's Shadow Tech Alchemy practice, the stuff that was in our first book, Shadow Tech, and now this is sort of the updated version of it. And if anybody came in here a little bit late, you can go back through when we end here tonight, and we can or you can hear the whole thing, and it's all there. Oh, that was good. Thank you, Dana. Thanks. I noticed I was getting a little bit sticky on the reading, and I think I'm going to fix some of the text in that paper. Yeah, by the way, again, go to the shadowtechalchemy.com YouTube page and go to the shadowtechalchemy.com website and click on the papers page. And the Shadow Complex is the paper that this is to a great degree about. If you don't have to get the emotional processing, if you don't have my second book, Transforming Darkness, you can get that free on the website. Just go to the books page and put in your email, and it'll send you the book. It'll give you the link to the book. And so that's there, and there's shadow work practices. There's a whole chapter on shadow work practices in there, and the emotional processing is one of the ones in there. If you want Shadow Tech, the book that came out of me and Melissa together, that you can also get through the website or on Amazon or Etsy. Hey James, you lurked, but was a statistical one up. I don't understand that. Finding a willing participant in this is what's been challenging for me. Yes, of course. So that's a good one. That's a good comment. So that is the ultimate challenge. Yes. The only thing I can say on that is that I was, before Melissa, I was 42 when I started with Melissa. And I was, like I told you in the story today, I just had gotten to the point probably a couple years prior where I was evolved enough and awake enough and had enough separation to where I could do this kind of work, and had been working on myself and doing my own shadow work and stuff for enough time. So Melissa kind of came in exactly when I needed her. And I was very dedicated to this. I wasn't spending all of my time reading Jungian psychology or looking for shadow work techniques, but I definitely was spending time on it. And I was doing other kinds of, all kinds of red pill research, and I was doing legal research for people in foreclosure and doing this other stuff. But I was definitely way more interested in inner development, and I was reading Robert Moore books and listening to Robert Moore lectures and Michael Meade and probably Jordan Peterson at the time. I found him early on. And, all that kind of stuff, Joseph Campbell and all that kind of stuff. I was just listening to all that, reading Mircea Eliade and all that, so, and I was probably still looking at some Eastern practices and stuff. So, but anyway, I was focusing on myself, and I was committing, and I was realizing this is what I have to do. So I was definitely not distracting and not avoiding working on myself. Reading, Robert Johnson's Owning Your Own Shadow, that's what got me started. So I attributed meeting Melissa to the fact that I was dedicated and to that I was not avoiding. I was not shadow bypassing. I was on the path for sure. and then the person I needed showed up. And so this is kind of the advice that I give to everybody else, is if the person that you need is not showing up, just commit more to the work that you can do alone. Get more serious about it. I tell people all the time who are into shadow work or who are into inner development and stuff, start listening to Robert Moore lectures. Read Marion Woodman. Read Robert Johnson. Go on. Start. Look at this stuff. Read this stuff. Get up to speed on this, and find whatever books or whatever you have. Get Robert Augustus Masters. That's his name. Bringing Your Shadow Out of the Dark. Get that book. Get a book on IFS. Introduction to Internal Family Systems by Richard Schwartz, or We All Have Parts by Colin West, or if you want something that's more even more advanced, get something from my friend Ion Farvahar, which is called IFS Practice Tips. I think it's called IFS Practice Tips. It's an orange covered book. Ion, A-I-O-N, Farvahar. And get his book. Get into it and start reading. Listen to Robert Moore lectures. Learn about all this stuff. And I tell this to people, and then they don't do it. So it's like, and I'm not talking to James, because I know James is working on it, but I'm just saying in general, there's always this cognitive dissonance, this pushback, where people are like, I want a conscious relationship. I want an alchemical relationship. I want to be free of these patterns. I wanted all this. And I'm like, okay, well, get to work. Start learning some techniques. Learn what fits for you. Get up to speed on the Jungian system. You got AI now to help you, teach you anything you want. People can get on ChatGPT or something like that, and they could get basic education and all this stuff without even opening a book. And then just people don't do it. So if you wonder why things are not moving, it's because you're not moving. That's why. And so when you do start moving, you're going to start getting results. You're going to start waking up. You're going to start getting more altitude in your consciousness, your watcher capacity above your ego. You're going to start to get less reactivity. You start doing this emotional processing technique that I talked about today. You're going to have way better access to your emotions, your masculine and feminine emotions. You're going to get way more depth, way more access. You're going to get heart chakra awakenings. You're going to get access to your heart chakra. You're going to get, you're going to progress and develop and slowly feel better, and it's all going to work out. It all is. And you're going to find the right people, whether they're intimate partners or other people that you can work with. It's all going to work out when you dedicate, when you say, this is what I do. This is my path. This is what I do. I study myself from the inside out. I work on myself from the inside out, and nothing is off the table. And I concentrate on my shadow material, and I make that a priority in my life. And when you do that, everything changes. Your whole life becomes numinous. Everything changes. It all steps up. You hopefully add it in. Sometimes sometimes I understand what you're texting. Sometimes I'm not understanding what you're texting, James. Dana says, yep. I've even asked different family members to do group therapy in the past, but no one ever agreed. Yeah, see, this is just reality. So I do know it's a rare situation, and this is why it kind of brings us back to ourselves. When you're not getting any help from outside, you just depend on yourself. But there's always someone. I mean, look, people who I'm talking to right now, you have me, right? I'm not far away. I'm right here. I'm right here. I'm a phone call away. I'm right here, right? So I put myself out there to people as a, in the case that you can't find anybody. Dana says, I've been doing it myself. It's just wild how many people would prefer to avoid this altogether and avoid this altogether and live without doing the work. Yes. Most people, this is something we find out on this path. Most people are not evolvers. They're not here to evolve, right? They're worker bees. They just kind of pass on the script. They just take what came with them. They act out they still have a daimon. They still have alchemical gold. It's coming through them. There's still always the opportunity that they're going to run into difficult situations in life, and they're going to crash, and they're going to learn from it in some way. This is just, but they're going to do it semi-unconsciously. They're going to develop some kind of wisdom just through experience. And so stuff's still happening. They're still evolving to some degree, but a lot of them are not, and a lot of them peak out in their 20s or 30s, and then they just kind of can't go any further than that. And that's most people. And then the generations just go on and on and on and on and on and on. It's a handful of people who are the evolver types, the alchemists, and who are like, oh, okay, I evolve myself, I heal myself, I evolve humanity through healing and evolving myself. And we're over here in our laboratories of psyche doing our thing, and that's what we're doing. And it's good to find other alchemists. This is, again, why I'm doing this show. And so you can at least know that there's somebody else out there that's doing this. And there's more people than me, but I know that it's not that many. James says, there is a place you can reach that you can regard your something with recognition and impartiality. You learn to forgive self as well as others, thinking in terms of solving karma in the now parts. Right, you can reach, right. You're all good. You're all good, James. Just, if you can't, just look over your text so that you don't have typos in there, because I have very poor vision. And the text is very small on OBS. And so then I have to try, with everybody, this is advice to everybody, try to type to me in a clean way so that I can really read what everybody's saying. That goes for everybody. But yes, let me talk about what you're saying though. So learn to forgive self as well as others. I need to write this down. Thank you. So this was always a part of our lesson on the emotional processing. And that is what you just brought up, that when you're doing this emotional processing and all this junk's coming up and all these thoughts are going up, that you can, this is where it's actually called, let me write this down so I can remember this, because I'm put this all in my workshop. This is the inner child perspective. Instead of seeing the wounded part of you or the crying part of you as parts, just see it as your inner child. This came before understanding of parts, and it's just simple. And so your inner child is the one that's angry. Your inner child is the one that's fearful. Your inner child is the one that's crying or feels guilty or grieving. And when you're there in the emotions with this part of you, then you have to sort of, your conscious awareness has to be the parent. You got to reparent yourself in that moment. And so you have to do active imagination where you're imagining yourself holding yourself as a child and caring for your child parts or your inner child. And so that's compassion for yourself, compassion for your inner child. Everybody's got the same, basically has had all kind, humanity's not that evolved. Just think how crazy it is that you grow up in this society and there's no rule book or no common understanding of how to parent children. Can you imagine that? Now, in more ancient cultures where everything is just passed on because everybody's living together and you have multi-generational families, people just watch each other parent each other, children, and it just gets passed on through that. But in our society where everything is all atomized and people leave, and then you raise children outside of the family home, and that it all gets pulled apart. And no one, I mean, you have people that have written books on parenting and stuff, but it's just the methods and techniques are widely varied. And so it's crazy to think that we have a society where no one knows what are the best ways to raise children, how to deal with different developmental issues and just the common things that occur when children are growing up, and how to approach that in the most mature and compassionate way possible, how to set proper boundaries. Isn't that just absolutely crazy that we just have to figure it out on our own? That's just insane. But that's where we're at. And so now realize that because of that situation, everybody's got all kinds of junk and is split up in all kinds of ways. And so we have to be the ones to reparent ourselves. This is just where we're at. So you got to have compassion for yourself. And then when you're thinking about all the people that hurt you and stuff, you have to have compassion for them too. But first for yourself. And so this is part of the emotional processing technique, and I'm glad you brought that up, James, so I could add that. When you find your axis mundi, the center, you can see it a lot better. Yeah, let me say something about the axis mundi. This is a big part of Jungian psychology, and this is one of the most fine. This is a very fine domain of consciousness, and truly spiritual, if you were to use that word. This is a very fine domain of consciousness. When you're talking about the axis mundi, the center of the world, which also runs through your psyche, you could say in the Hindu tradition it's down the spine, or you could say it comes through the heart. People might have a different perspective coming from different places. Jung identified a spiritual center in the individual he called the self, which is not the conscious ego. So what's happening is that you have this spiritual center, this imago Dei, this image of God, the divine spark. I really like using the Hindu understanding of Brahman and Atman. It's very nice to understand the Jungian self through that model, because Jung's understanding of that doesn't have a deep basis in Western spirituality. The Western version of the self is the Christ. But because the Christians do not identify Christ inside yourself, They identify how to relate to Christ through yourself and have a personal God, but they don't actively really identify it in the soul, in the psyche. Christ is still out there. Christ is still in the heavens, or somehow out there. It's not quite pulled in. Now, I'm sure in certain mystical versions of Christianity it is. But in the Hindu system, it's definitely identified in the human psyche and body, the Atman. And so this is the fractal image of the Creator that exists inside of you. You have your own fractal version of it inside of you. And so that thing has your divine plan, so to speak, to use New Age terms. That thing has your soul code. That thing has your daimon, your vocation, your soul script, what you're to be doing, and your general direction. And then you have your ego, the conscious mind that you usually call I or me. And they're not the same. They're part of the same structure. They're all part of the psyche. But the self is this soul code, and it is the organizing principle that pulls it all together. But what happens in our development as we've developed, as human beings, as we've evolved, the ego has got stronger and stronger and stronger. So we used to be more collective-minded, and now we're very individual-minded, individualistic. And so we have a clear, separate self now. People identify in the prefrontal cortex and all of that. We have a clear, separate self. And but that ego is what our society has been revering, and that's the heroism and progress, and you could say in a negative light, you could say it's Promethean. Let's say it's Promethean. In a negative light, you could say it's Luciferian, but let's just call it Promethean. And so we've been living on ego. And what we're doing with this, with the individuation, with the alchemy, with the Jungian work, is that we're doing what all the spiritual traditions teach you to do, and that is to come back to God and let God run your life. The only difference is that we see it more on the inside. It's outside and it's inside. It's not one or the other. It's all. God is all. God is outside, God is inside, God is everywhere. But our sort of axis point, our 0 point energy source is here in the personal mind body. That's our connection. And so we start to tune into that and let that speak in its own language and its own method. And this is where to understand what the self wants, what the God image wants, is you are analyzing dreams, you are understanding the mirroring of the external world and synchronicities, you are following epiphanies, you are following intuitions, you are following circumstances that come to you, relationships and circumstances that come to you that put you on the path, and you come to recognize that there is a plan, there is a soul code, and it knows where you're supposed to go. And so you need to develop the ego and experience ego life. But then you have to, as you get older especially, you need to start recentering down to the self, the capital S self, and start reorienting yourself less from the individual ego and more from this deeper thing. And you could also say that what gets reincarnated, if you're looking at reincarnation and karma, like what James was talking about, then you are that's what's reincarnating, right? The ego is going to change from life to life. The part that's going to keep going and evolving is this self structure. The reincarnation isn't really expressly acknowledged in the Jungian way, but if you were to put it in there, that's where it would go. So this is a finer way of approaching life. It's a deeper way. This is a spiritual life. This is a in a traditional religious way, this would be letting go and letting God. This would be living God's plan. It's just that we see it more personified and more tied to the personal psyche. Okay, Dana. After last week, I journaled to my inner orphan. I comforted her, acknowledged how she felt scared and sad and alone, and I imagined giving her a hug and told her it won't be like this forever. That's really good, Dana. Keep doing that. Keep doing that and invite her to talk to you, invite her to show you things, images, memories. If she needs to work through any emotions that are part of a memory, make sure that you spend time to go through those memories and to emotionally process them the way we described. And you can develop a relationship with that little girl and let her prompt you when you need to process. And just really, even though this is just, this isn't objective science or anything, but this is how the psyche works, and it works through images and through imagination. And so it's partly imagination, but imagination is carrying the psychological, the psychic scripting, and so we use the imagination as a way to carry these structures that you can't actually describe with any language. Yes, Atman. Joseph Campbell loved that too. Yes, Joseph Campbell, absolutely. He's a Jungian, and pretty dedicated Jungian too. Even though Joseph Campbell's work was, more than just the Jungian system, it was comparative mythology. Actually, there's a book called The Portable Jung that Joseph Campbell was the editor of, and he went and selected all the Jungian writings that he thought should make it into that volume. So he was very familiar with all of Jung's work. Oh, Stefania says, I like the idea that I have a piece of God in me. It resonates big time. Oh, yeah. Yes. This is in many, many spiritual systems. This is so in the Hindu system, you got Brahman, that's the all, and then you have your fractal version of it in yourself, the Atman. The Gnostics have the divine spark, right? The Christians have the Christ, and they allude to the fact that Christ is right here in the center, in the heart, and the personal God, and all of that. They allude to it, but they don't quite go far enough to say that that's there, probably because people who are a little less mature would confuse the God image of Christ with their ego instead of with this. But it could have been developed more cleanly, and that could have been out there, and I'm sure if I studied the Gospel of Thomas and the Gnostic texts and the mystic Christian texts, I will find that they will say that you have a piece of God right here, and Jung definitely said it, and it's called the Self with a capital S, and it's an elusive concept. It's a paradoxical, and here's an interesting thing about this. Let me add more for this for you, is that this is the more dangerous part of a Jungian understanding. Instead of like in the Judeo-Christian system, they split God into parts, right? So you've got Father God, Yahweh, right? Allah. Then you've got the Christians have Christ, and then they all have some version of Mary, and they got a couple versions of Mary, and they have the Holy Spirit, and so they have elements that are feminine, but they're not they don't really have it worked out very well. There's your patriarchy for you, but they don't have that worked out, but it's still another split in God. And then you got the devil living in the underworld. So God is split up into these different characters. And so Jung pulls them all back together into this self structure. This is all one thing. And so the main thing I was going to say about that is that the God and the devil are in the self. That's the light and the dark, the ego and the shadow, right? So it's all inside. So the self, even though, and this is where there's a sort of a very dangerous side of the self, and that the self is amoral. It is amoral, and it will basically, if it's going to drag you through stuff that's going to hurt. And stuff that you run into in life that you would normally say, the devil caused that. The Jungians would say, no, that's part of the self's plan because the devil is part of God. Totally blasphemous to the Christians. Totally blasphemous to the Christians, but if you think about it, of course, the one and all has everything in it. And if we are made in God's image, well, then of course we're going to have the light and the dark and everything in between in us. And it's all going to be part of us. So of course that makes sense. Dana says, yes, to me, I call it my spirit or my soul. Yes, exactly. Thank you so much. I know this community is here for me. I did almost call you once, but after that and continued prayer, I had a much better week. Yeah, you can always call me. And I'm glad that you're feeling some community in here, Dana, and that this stuff is resonating. And I like, so the thing with soul and spirit and psyche and all of everybody, all these traditions have these different terms that apply to different things and different archetypes and all of that. But the soul would normally be in the West. It would normally be the psyche, would be the soul, would be the inner state. But I actually just use the psyche is the psyche. It's the mind, the totality of it, not just thinking, but feeling and everything that's in the mind. And then the soul is basically the self. It's the center of the psyche. It's literally the soul, right? And so it'd be a good project for me, actually, to go through, use AI to help me go through the Jungian literature, and there's probably some books on this that have been written on this where somebody has gone looking at all these terms and how different traditions have used these terms and different translations of these terms, and try to get fully up to speed on which soul, spirit, psyche, self, and all the other terms. And you got the different bodies, and etheric body and astral body and light body and golden body. I mean, there's so many different pieces of the psyche, you could say, that different traditions use and emphasize, and we got to kind of bring that together and have some kind of translation software for that. James says that he employs alchemical active imagination. Very good. Yeah, you're a very good artist, and you're very good with your vision, so you probably do very well with that. The Holy Inquisition saw to a lot of masking. Yes, of course. Absolutely it did. It really did. That was the Dark Ages, So, Dana sent a link to Suno. Okay, I'll check that later. She said, I felt compelled to share some spiritual type songs I wrote last year using, I've used Suno too. I mean, I'm a professional musician, but I would struggle to write like a new age song or something like that, and so I was using it to write new age music. I'm still paying for the subscription and stuff, but I haven't been using it that much. It's amazing. Thank you for the link. I'll check it out. In fact, let me see if I can let's see if I can open that up now. No, and no, I'm going to have to do that after I'm done on my other. I can't do that inside of OBS. This is another system that I use for broadcasting. Okay. Dana says, James says, Bernardo Kastrup made a good stab of summarizing the arc, describing it. Okay, yeah, send me that link to that one. I love Bernardo Kastrup. His was a Western spin, though. Yeah, right. The Daimon and the Soul of... Daimon and the Soul of the West. Was that the book, or was that a lecture? Because I know that I've seen lectures by him on that subject. I think that's the book, right? Yeah. And the one I want to read from him is his, the book. Yeah. The one I want to read next is his book on, that's not the book on Jung, is it? No, that's not the book on Jung. There's a book on Jung. I love how Kastrup is a Jungian. I love that. Don't talk to him about politics, but everything other than that, man, I just think he's amazing. I just love Kastrup. And he's just like, he's our, he's in that, he's just an amazing philosopher. Just amazing. He's just such a badass. He's one of the West's greatest philosophers, I think. I mean, he is in the absolute top greatest philosophers, I think, of all time, really. That goes over his personal experiences, and he's literally a rocket scientist. Yeah, he's amazing. The first one is more of a rock type song, and the second is kind of a ballad, popish style. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll look, Dana. Let me see if I can. I don't think it's letting me. Yeah, I cannot copy that from inside of here, but I'll have to open it up on my computer later. I think I might be able to do it right now while we're talking, because I think we're into the end of the show, guys. Let me go over to my Shadow Tech Alchemy, and let me make sure that I've muted, and then we go here. Okay, that's not going to work. Can't do it while I'm live. I'll check it out, Dana, for sure. And okay, so is anybody else wanting to say anything before we go? To anyone that hasn't been here before, hasn't been here much, we're here every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central. And I'm always open to everybody's suggestions of what they want to talk about. And I encourage everybody to look at the white papers that I have on shadowtechalchemy.com, or use me as a resource in any way you want. I know that a lot of my material is kind of advanced, and so that's why these conversations are good, because we can kind of just talk about things in just basic English language. And so I encourage you guys to utilize me, and because I'm doing this for you guys. I mean, I can. That's why I have a public outreach now. And if anybody's in the Austin or Central Texas area, check the workshops page. And I'll have workshops up there, because I've been starting those over here now. What else do we have? Spank the live button. Oh yeah, hit the like button. Hit the like button. I never say that, right? I never say that. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Yeah, okay, let's say that. And all right, everybody. So I think, and you just, when this ends in a second now, you can go back or whenever you want and rewatch it. I'm gonna cut up some piece of last week's talk. I might cut this one out and put this up there on the front end of the YouTube channel. Thanks for the heart, James. And thanks to everybody that was in here tonight, and Dana and Stefania, and I think was Theo in here. I think he was, and yeah, he was in here, and Bondasa, and who else was in here? So thank you guys, and we will see you on the next one. Don't forget to tell it to the bees. He likes the bees. Why don't you do some paintings or something, some drawings, and put those bees in there? That'd be great. Okay. Talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.